You know, there are several different ways of interpreting the 12 links of dependent arising. And today we're going to look at the interpretation of these 12 links in terms of everyday life. So imagine two friends, John and Ian, for example. Whenever they meet, they greet each other warmly, and then one day Ian responds to John with silence and a sort of sour expression. And John takes this personally, and he feels peeved, and he stops talking to him as a result. So there's a series of chain reactions between them that can be described in terms of the 12 links. And that's what we're going to go through now, link by link. So first, as you know, the first link is ignorance. So John is ignorant of the true reason for Ian's grim face. He fails to reflect on it and doesn't try to find out why Ian is behaving that way. And he's therefore not aware that the real reasons for his behaviour have nothing to do with his feelings for Ian. It's something else entirely. Then the second link is formations or mental formations. So, to explain how this manifests in their chain reactions, John proceeds to think about the situation and formulates theories in his mind according to his temperament to try and understand, why Ian is behaving this way. And these gives rise to doubt and anger and resentment, and lots of different emotions come up as he thinks about the situation. So those are the mental formations in action, colouring the way we see things. Then the third link is consciousness. Now, under this influence, under the influence of the mental formations, right, which have just been occurring in his mind, let's imagine that John broods. He sees all Ian's actions in a negative light. He's sort of suspicious, And the more he thinks about the situation, the surer he becomes that every gesture that Ian makes towards him is offensive. So this is the consciousness that is arising in this present moment, together with the mental formations, that are determining the way that consciousness is perceiving things. Then the fourth link is body and mind. John's feelings, thoughts, moods, facial expressions, and gestures begin to take on the features of an angry and offended person functioning in accordance with that consciousness. So in other words, his bodily gestures, his speech, what he says, are both affected and determined by his mental state. And that mental state is determined by the mental formations. So that there is a chain reaction in this, according to Buddhist psychology. Then the fifth link is the sense bases. John's sense organs are primed to receive information that is related to or conditioned by his anger and hurt. So the senses are obviously what we use to perceive the situation and to, Ian perceives John, John perceives Ian through the senses, but the senses themselves are primed by the mind and by the mental formations and by all those previous links. Then the sixth link is contact. The actions or qualities that impact John's senses are those that are associated with this situation. So, for example, he's especially sensitive to anyone's frowning or unfriendly gestures because he's so impacted by what's happening with his friend that he starts actually seeing everyone in the same light. It overruns into other situations and to his perception of other people too. I mean, at an extreme, that's the sort of thing we would call paranoia, So you're taking your experience with one situation and then projecting it onto other situations which are actually not related directly. Now, the seventh link is feeling. So the feelings arise in John's consciousness through sense contact, and they're unpleasant, okay? Because of everything we've seen so far, the way he's going to feel about what he perceives is going to be unpleasant. The eighth link is craving. So craving for non-existence arises in the form of aversion for the offensive image and as desire for it to go away or to be destroyed. So craving has both a negative and a positive aspect, if you like. You can crave and want something, but you could also crave for the thing to go away because you don't like it. So craving sets in as not wanting to see this offensive friend anymore. Then the ninth link is clinging. John begins to think obsessively about Ian's behaviour. He interprets it as a direct and personal challenge, and he sees him as an enemy, and he concludes that the situation needs to be remedied. The 10th link is becoming. John's subsequent behaviour falls under the influence of clinging, and his actions become those of an antagonist. He starts acting out the story that's in his head. So becoming is when everything that's been happening in your mind up to now actually starts manifesting in situations, in the way you respond to situations and the way you create situations through your responses. The 11th link is birth. So as the feeling of enmity becomes more distinct, it's assumed as an identity. So the distinction between me and him becomes sharper, and there's a self that feels somehow obliged to respond to the situation. So in this Buddhist context of psychological chain reactions, birth is very much a question of identifying with something as being who you are, right? Or being, or defining yourself in relation to something else. So like if my friend has become my enemy, then I am reacting accordingly. I'm the offended party, and I'm going to respond accordingly. So identify with all the different links and processes and thoughts and feelings that have gone on before. And I say, this is me and that is him. So that is called birth. And lastly, the 12th link is aging and death. So this sense of personal identity exists and flourishes in dependence on certain conditions, such as the desire to appear tough, to preserve one's honour and pride, and to be the winner. And these afflictions influence John's moods and produce insecurity and anxiety. And these in turn feed his ignorance, and thus a new round of the cycle begins. So that's one way of trying to understand how these different links produce each other in a chain reaction in every single situation of our lives. I've just taken one example here, but the principle applies throughout our lives.